All right. So, welcome, Tami. Thanks for being with us. I wondered if you might just take a moment to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Tami Guerrier. I am the past deacon chair for First Baptist. I've been a member of First Baptist since, somewhere right around 1998. So I've been here for quite a while. I've been involved in teaching Sunday school, so I've seen a lot of the kids grow up here. I'm a Stephen minister, and I've been active in a lot of other areas as well. World Hunger has always been one of my favorites as well. Um, and um, and so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, awesome. One of the other ways that you have been active in our church is you were a co-leader for the Be the Bridge book study that we undertook together this past summer, and which is what we'll be talking about today. I would love to know beyond, Stacy told me I had to. I'm curious to know, how come you said yes? What brought you to this study, and why were you willing to lead?
Well, with all of the events that took place this summer, with the death of George Floyd actually being kind of the tipping point for me at that point. Certainly lots of things happened after that as well. Um, it was devastating to me. And I saw a lot of my friends who were people of color, who were going through a very hard and difficult time. And I just didn't know what I could do and what needed to happen, but I felt something needed to happen and that I needed to do something. It's something that I had I think God had placed in my heart at a very early age. When I was in high school, I grew up in Iowa on a farm, and really, you know, a farm in Iowa. I mean, I was 200 miles from the nearest city, 50 miles from the nearest McDonald's. There was really no other races, of different people of different nationalities or color or anything in my area. So I really didn't experience or see anyone of a different race until I went to college. But even when I was in high school, there were some things that, I picked out books to read that shared some of those experiences. And it just was always something that really bothered me,
Mhm.
that I knew discrimination and certain things were going on that shouldn't happen. I certainly didn't know everything that was happening, but I knew it wasn't happening. And then as I became a little bit got more involved in our world and I grew older and lived in cities, I saw what was going on, and it really did bother me. And I tried to make differences where I could, but it never seemed to be enough. And this summer, I guess when you asked me first, I said no, and I didn't think that I could. And then I sat there and I thought about it, and I thought, Tami, what are you doing? This is something, this is God speaking to you. This is something that you should do. This is what you've been asking for. So I turned around and said yes.
So before the group started, you'd agreed to be a leader, but I'm curious, did you have any anxieties about the group or how things were going to go?
Yes. So I
Yeah,
was very nervous.
tell us about it.
It was, I had a lot of anxiety. I was anxious that I myself would say something that would be offensive to someone,
Mhm.
and even though I'd had some diversity training, I still just didn't, you just never know. And I didn't know everyone's background in the group, and so I didn't know their family history or what their history was coming in. And Paxton was leading the group, and I know Paxton, and I know he's a very sweet man. But I didn't want to offend anyone.
Mhm.
The other was that so many things had just happened in our country, and and people of color were suffering and they were hurting so badly. And I didn't want to put undue pressure on Paxton especially, but anyone else in our group who might have a history too, to explain or re-explain something that they'd already maybe tried to tell us years and over the years of what it was like. And now, just because I, as a white person, was ready to listen, I expected him to be able to explain it now, when it was very painful to explain. And so I just didn't want to, I wanted to be very, I wanted to learn, I wanted to help everyone else learn. And but I really realized that to do that, we really needed to listen more than we needed to talk, probably. And I tried to be very careful with that.
Sure. So, now being on this side of the group, based on those anxieties and concerns, how do you think it went?
I think it went really well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that had to do with, as a church and as our group was fabulous. And
Mm-hmm.
so everybody was, I think everybody, kind of came in with the same feeling of wanting to learn and listen. And so they understood and was feeling that, the pain that was going on at that time, I think. And so wasn't an issue. Paxton was, Paxton's just a great guy to have as a teacher. And so he was very, I think he let a lot of things kind of roll with him just because he wanted to help us learn. Mm-hmm. And he let that, he was able to let some things go to help us learn. And that was very kind of him.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of learning, tell me something that you learned in the experience.
Oh, there was so much. I think one of the things, well, first of all, there's not a lot of, the history that we learned in our, in our schools is not reflective of what actually happened in Black history or in Native American history or any of that type of history other than white history, that really is what happened. And it's much more painful than what I ever expected. And there were a few surprises in there too. There were a few things that I just didn't realize had happened, like after the Civil War, that, that a lot of people of color really were able to build up and become lawyers and doctors and do a lot of great things that I just never learned about. And so that, getting those facts and learning about those facts is very important. I think the other piece, though, that's probably just as important is I learned about how I benefited from being white. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really given that much thought at all, ever. But that there's a lot of things, that that I benefit from going into a grocery store or a convenience store and not having someone follow me or watch me closely because they think that I might pick something up, to the point of, when I grew up, my parents, I was in the Midwest. We weren't rich by any means, but we did own a home and we had a car. Mm-hmm. And when I babysat or earned money, it wasn't to help feed my brothers and my sisters. It was so I could go buy new clothes or makeup or whatever else I wanted. Where a lot of times, due to the systemic processes that are in place, that's not the case for someone who is Black. Mm-hmm. And I've benefited from that.
Yeah. So So if there's anything that I think people struggle with, and by people, I mean people who are of the majority race, the white, Caucasian race, it is that concept. I think one of the questions that I have for you here in a minute has to do with why do this work distinctly as a Christian? And so I guess I'm wondering if you might have something to say to a fellow Christian who is reactive to what you've just said and doesn't want to even consider the possibility. Do you have any words of advice or not caution exactly, but encouragement for a fellow brother or sister in Christ who gets real nervous when people say some of the things that you've just said?
I think sometimes, although we need to own it personally, we're owning it personally as our country and as our, as our community and what happened. We weren't there, personally when it occurred. And so we couldn't make the decisions or do anything to stop it, but we can do something now. And now is the time that we can make our efforts to make the change. And so I guess where I found a little bit of piece of it is not that I do take it personally, but not to beat myself up on it and not to feel the shame, but to use it as a way to motivate myself to make a change and to act on it to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. And so then this next question is related and perhaps very similar, but I wonder if from your vantage point, part of the faithfulness of the church, like, is there something that you think God is asking of the church right now? And what does the church's faithfulness in response to God look like, at least from your vantage point at this time?
I don't think we can be quiet and sit back. I think if we do that, it's saying that, what people did before us is okay, and we're okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think God's okay with that, and I think He's leading us to change. I think He's, always said, love your neighbor, and love is an action. It's not a feeling, it's something that we have to act on, and I think this is something that we need to do to act. I can't say what we need to do. I think it needs to be more than words. But I think for each church and each person within our church, if we start to gather together and start to work together, I think God is going to lead us to what He would have us do. A lot of it comes from listening and learning and letting Him lead us in the direction that we need to go. But I don't believe we can just sit back and not do anything.
Good, thank you. All right, my last question is an open-ended one, and that is just for me to say, what haven't I asked that I should have? Is there anything that you feel like needs to be said that I haven't given you the opportunity to say in the questions that I've asked you?
I have to say that I'm really grateful that this has that you've been open to bringing this the topic of race up and being open to discussing it through our church and being open to having the class. I think it's the first step through reconciliation, and I think we need to take those steps and and start to see what that might look at. I don't think that it's going to be easy, and I think it's sometimes going to be really hard. and it may cause tears, but it's important that we do this, and that we acknowledge it, and that we can bring some change. I think the other piece that, it's kind of robbed us of is that for years we've kind of been robbed of those relationships.
Yeah.
And this starts to open the door so we can start to build relationships where we haven't had as much opportunity as we've had before. And I look forward to that.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tami, for your time and your good thoughts and your good work. And we look forward to this next study that you'll lead some of us through.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Tami.